Well, this is the fourth law of combat leadership that I used to teach in the SEAL teams that now I teach to corporations and companies and teams. Decentralized command. It's everything you just said. Decentralized command. I want my subordinate leadership to be leaders.
Yeah.
I want them to understand where we're going, and I don't really care how they get there. And I can put some parameters on them. Hey, you can't do this, you can't do that. But everything else inside that box you can do. Make decisions, go make things happen. That's decentralized command. And yeah, that's why we have a great military. And when we get away from that is when we start having problems. That's why you hear about the Vietnam War. What was happening during the Vietnam War? Well, you had Johnson back in DC making decisions about what targets we were going to hit in Vietnam. That's no way to run a war. And that's why you have problems in those situations. So definitely decentralized command as a leadership system, it's really vastly superior to any other system. And that's why that group that pulls ahead. And the other thing that you talk about, that group that's based on values and based on, really, to me, relationships.
Yeah.
It's the same thing, right? If I have a team and we all get along and we all can talk to each other, we trust each other, we care about each other, you put that team against a team that has a bunch of animosity and they don't trust each other, the team that has good relationships is going to annihilate the team that doesn't. And we see this over and over again in the business world. We saw it in the SEAL platoons. In fact, this is funny. In a SEAL platoon, so I was running the advanced training for the SEALs, where you're getting SEAL platoons ready. They've already gone through all the basic training. You've got experienced SEALs, some new SEALs, but experienced SEALs and some newer SEALs, but they're getting ready to go on deployment. And it's a very strenuous, arduous training cycle. And you're pretty much training them some collective skills, but then you're putting them in mission scenarios where they're going to go out and do simulated combat missions. And if you would see a fracture between guys in the platoon, you'd watch it, you'd pay attention. And if it started to get worse, the platoon was going to fall apart. The platoons that occasionally would fail a block of training, they'd fail land warfare, they'd fail urban combat, or they'd fail close quarters combat. The reason they would fail was because they had fissures in the platoon that would break them apart.
Well, how would those fissures develop?
Ego.
Okay, so they're developing around people who are playing power games.
Yep. So you're the platoon chief. So in a SEAL platoon, the platoon chief's probably been in for 12 to 15 years. He's got a lot of tactical experience. And then you've got the platoon commander, who's an officer. He probably has 4 or 5 years. He's a little less tactically experienced, but he's the guy that's overall in charge, right? He's the guy that actually is the head of the platoon. So a good platoon chief is going to offer suggestions, and a good platoon officer is going to go, yep, chief, that makes sense.
Yeah.
That's a beautiful thing. And everyone can kind of see that the platoon chief is sort of running the platoon with the permission of, for lack of a better word, the permission of the platoon commander. Well, occasionally you get a platoon commander that wants everyone to know that he's the one that's making the decisions. And he starts to, well, we're not going to do it that way. And right there, you got friction. Or it can be the other way around. It can be the platoon chief that wants everyone to know that, hey, we're going to do it my way. And the platoon commander doesn't want to do that because he's an idiot. And you just end up with this explosion.
Well, that's that narcissism, eh?
Oh, it is 100%.
That idea that you want to be the one that people know did it.
Yes.
Right? That's a big problem, right? Because then you're doing it because you want to be known. Right? And that's a false form of prestige. Right? And the narcissistic types are always after the false forms of prestige. Like, real prestige comes when people know that you're good at delivering something they want to have delivered. Right? That's the equivalent of real ability. And so there's something else that's, I think we can tie together what we talked about to begin with. So here's how kids develop friendships. So 2 kids will start interacting with each other on the playground, right? Say they're like 4 years old, a boy and a girl, and the boy proposes some possible play topics. So that could be a game, or it could be like a drama. So kids will pretend. So maybe the boy will say, do you want to play house? Okay, now he doesn't say to the girl, you have to play house, because then if she does play, it's not going to be any fun. Plus, she isn't going to play, and she's going to be looking for an escape or some other kid to play with, like, instantly. So it has to be an invitation, right? And then they have to jointly negotiate the rules, because if you're playing house, you could play husband and wife, or you could play, husband and daughter, or there's all sorts of different roles, or you could play two sons, or one of you could be the cat. Like there's a lot of roles that can be taken. And the next rule is both kids have to agree on the rules and they have to want to play. And play is particularly interesting in this regard because if there's any element of compulsion, or fear, the fun stops. It's a very delicate motivational state, play, because any other motivational state will take it out. So you have to do it exactly right to get the spirit of play going. So if the boy does this well, then he'll play this game with the girl and it'll be fun for both of them. Mm-hmm. And then you imagine there's a fairly tight set of constraints that are operating to make that game fun for both, voluntarism being one of them. They have to pick their roles. They have to share their aim. They have to agree on what the game is going to be. They have to agree on the principles. So then they can play the game. And now they're experimenting with communicating with one another within that framework. Okay, now if that goes well, they'll end and they'll say, well, that was fun. And they'll say, would you like to play again? Okay, so now what you're having is a sequence of games, right? And a friend is someone that a sequence of games can be played with, a variety of different games, and that's a relationship. So now imagine that, there are pretty tight constraints on how you have to play a game to make the game fun. You have to have a goal. You have to try to make the goal. You have to compete because you want to do a good job. Maybe you even want to do a better job than the person you're playing with, and you have to cooperate because you have to stay within the confines of the game. Okay, so that's a pretty tight set of constraints. Now imagine that across a set of games, the constraints are even tighter because now you have to be able to do that flexibly in a bunch of different situations with a bunch of different games with the same person, and they have to want to continue it. Okay, that's a friendship. Now imagine that there's a pattern of behavior that makes that, an attitude that makes that more possible. Okay, that's an ethical attitude, and there's nothing morally relativistic about that. You can see that, right? Because imagine that you have a friend and it's fun to play chess with him and it's fun to play basketball, right? Well, there's not a lot of commonality between those two games, but there's a commonality of attitude that can be brought to bear across those games. And that's the principle that's antithetical to power. And I think that what you're doing when you're mentoring people is you're teaching them how to play that game, that long-term iterative game. And the pleasure in that, imagine it's an instinct. The people who are best at that have the children who thrived, because they taught their children how to play games that everybody wanted to play so that they were always being called upon to play. And so that was a radically effective reproductive strategy, effective enough to become an instinct, and an instinct that's so powerful that it makes itself manifest as that pleasure in mentoring that you described.
Yeah,
right?
And that thing when you mentioned about these people you want to interact with, even when you're a little kid, it's trust, listen, respect, influence, and care, right? If you and I are going to play the game together, but you're just imposing your rules on me, I'm not going to like it. Or you don't listen to any of the input that I want to give, I'm not going to play with you anymore.
Right.
If I can see that you don't care, that I'm the one that keeps falling down on the ground every time we do this part of the game, you don't care about me, this isn't going to last very long.
Yeah.
And in order for us to build a relationship, you got to give this stuff. You got to give that trust. You got to listen to what other people have to say.